Hello, and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we continue our deep dive into Velvet by Ed Brubaker, Steve Epting, and Elizabeth Breitweiser into Volume 2, The Secret Lives of Dead Men. God,
great cover. It's a great title.
It does the Toby Ziegler floating opposites.
Yep.
And even if it was The Lives of Dead Men, that has the Bond feel, and then you find the perfect adjective for
the
a spy
secret
thing.
lives.
The secret lives of dead men.
Absolutely.
And it, I think it has a little more meaning than the first one, but it's still just kind of a throwaway.
It's still overall an empty phrase because it's just like, okay, it's like I don't know. The Bond title I always think of is "You Only Live Twice." Because that's when you hear that and you're like, oh, that's good. And you're like, wait, no, that doesn't make a damn bit of sense, And then you're like, oh, right, that's the point. It's not supposed to make sense.
That's the one where he fakes his death in the opening scene, right?
Yes.
In Japan or somewhere.
Yeah. And then some really, really terrible yellow face, but we're not going to get into that. But in terms of titles, that's one that I always think about in terms of like that to me, that's the quintessential Bond title and the quintessential spy title. The
I
idea
think if
of,
I gave it more thought, that would probably be for me. If you ask me at any time for a Bond title, my go-to is From Russia with Love, because I feel like it's riffed on so much.
Yes, and that's very true. And
it also doesn't really mean anything. They all have the veneer of meaning.
Yeah. Well, I will say From Russia with Love, actually, because he at one point he actually writes that on the picture,
right.
And of course he writes it weirdly backwards. He writes "with love" and then writes above it "from Russia." So that part there makes sense there. But yeah, when I think of that kind of weird contradictory spy title, "You Only Live Twice" is just, to me, that one, it everything about that feels so perfect, and you put just 4 seconds of thought into it, you're like, nope, that's a complete nonsense phrase. And that's what we have here from Brubaker and Epting. Again, "before the living end" just sounds cool, but doesn't mean anything. And you're right, "The Secret Lives of Dead Men," you understand what that is, but again, ultimately it is just kind of like word salad, like what sounds cool.
Right.
And I
which I gotta say, at least they're avoiding the Pierce Brosnan thing of using, saying the title. If at some point Velvet was like, "This is what it's like looking into the secret lives of dead men," it would be like, oh, come on.
Well, okay. Okay.
Pierce Brosnan would always say,
hold on.
You managed to live to die another day. And it's like, ding, ding, ding.
I'm gonna say yes. That would be very cheesy, but also I would find that hysterical.
Oh, because it would be referencing when it's done poorly. Right. It would be a meta, but it's like fourth wall breaking almost to do that when it's so clearly in this genre anyway. We just don't need it. It's gratuitous.
But there's a part of me that is now set that there isn't, that at some point
maybe
Velvet doesn't
has
say that would be that's the right level of cheese, I think, and kind of meta commentary. But talking about one thing I mentioned last week, and I don't know if we mentioned it on the show or maybe it's after recorded. One thing I wanted to talk about was the covers for this series. And I know most people probably reading this either have the trades or maybe even found the deluxe the deluxe edition, the complete collection there. And I know as we were talking before we started recording, because I want to double check in the trades, and I'm guessing in the deluxe edition as well, they include the artwork for the covers. They're included as where they were before each issue as kind of like chapter breaks. So you see kind of the incredible art there. But one thing they're missing is that they don't have any of the trade dress on them. It's just the Virgin image that Steve Epting did, which I want to talk about first, saying that what I love about those covers is, Epting's art, his interior art, I think it's fair to say, has a level of realism to it. right? It's not
Right.
it's not cartoony in any way, and I don't mean that. I don't mean cartoony as a pejorative at all. I don't mean that as a negative. You know, my favorite artist of all time, I've said before, is Darwin Cook, and there is no other way to describe Darwin Cook's art other than to say it is cartoony. Like that is how he draws. He's not drawing realism. That's not what his goal is. But you see someone like Epting here. There's a realism to his interior art there, but he's not going for like a photo realism. You know,
Right.
he's not making that attempt there. And I think part of that is I think working with the colorist in this case, you know, Betty Breitweiser, in terms of how these faces look, how the people look. You know, it's drawn, but you can, you know, you can tell what they're striving for. Compare that to when Epting does the covers, and I believe Epting does the covers on his own. I don't think anyone else colors those. So there, he's reaching for something different, and on the covers, you can tell at that point he's going for some level of photorealism. When you see, you know, obviously for the most part, you know, Velvet is on the cover of all these issues. The way that she is colored and shaded and everything about it, there's an attempt to specifically try to make those covers look kind of like those kind of pulp serial movie posters, which have this kind of, that's drawn, but there is a photorealism to the art. You know, it's like they're going for a very specific vibe, and yet you can see that obviously the character design hasn't changed, the line work hasn't changed, so it's still the same person drawing the lines, but because of how the approach in coloring and finishing it comes off, you get a different sense. You know, the colors on the interior they're a little more flat. You know, they're not quite as dynamic, not quite as as kind of high contrast as you see on the covers, and I think that makes a huge difference. And so I love seeing that of this kind of like hyper realistic, and even in some of the issues when there's a title page, it's often in black and white. In the issue, there'll be like a super photorealistic depiction in that, which is, you know, separate from what the interior art looks like. I'm thinking of you know, just in issue 6, the beginning of this arc, you know, it's this photo of Velvet with 2 knives out. It's like a double page splash. And again, the way that is shaded and colored, it is a completely different look than what you see, you know, just the previous page of her in the regular interior art. So seeing those different contrasts and those different levels there, depending on what they're trying to show. Again, all with the same artist, all with the same line work, but different coloring, different shading, different.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive.
Inks and all that. Yeah, yeah.
And I think we talked about it before. If you pause to think about it, how different sequential story art is from cover art.
Yeah.
And this is the perfect case because it's literally the same guy drawing the same character, but one is for like a movie poster and one is for
the actual
scenes
action
in a movie. Right.
Yeah. It's and being able to do both like that is truly great. Also with the covers, and this is something that happens for the most part, specifically in this arc. But for whatever reason, the 5 issues in this arc, all the covers, they have taglines on them. And I wrote them down here.
I don't think they do in the trade.
Well, yeah, in the trade, you get you're just getting the virgin image, no trade dress there. But I wrote these down because they're phenomenal, and I can't help but read them in movie trailer voice. Guy.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
but I'm going to try not to. So issue 6.
Oh no! I think you can't say that and then not.
Okay, because I can't, because the first one on issue 6, the first words are literally "in a world." Okay, like
in a world. Yeah,
in a world of lies, she'd kill to find the truth. Like that's text on the cover of issue 6, and you're like,
that's so good.
What I was saying before about
they just had a blast making this.
That level
I think
cheese.
that's the lesson here.
Absolutely. There's a level of cheese there that they have to understand. They put a ridiculous tagline on it. Again, the first 3 words are "in a world." Like you can't use that as a tagline.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can't use that or say it or write it and not know what you're trying to do. And again, the idea that so many of these covers are evoking that kind of old school kind of, again, those kind of pulp serial movie posters, like these look like stuff from the area, from the 60s and 70s or whatnot. They're drawn like that, presented like that, and then you put a ridiculous tag like a tagline like, in a world of lies, she'd kill to find the truth. Again, talking about floating opposites from Toby Ziegler. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Lies and truth. Yep.
No, I think they at least get that. I can't remember. Are you a Parks and Recreation fan?
I wouldn't say I mean, I've seen it. I wouldn't say I'm a super fan. So
okay. Well, there's one episode where they're making a campaign trailer for Leslie's campaign, and they're going against Paul Rudd's character, and they're trying to make an attack ad. And they're trying to use that ominous voiceover, like Bobby Newport's never had a real job in his life. And it's just like a 3-minute mashup of all the characters trying to do the most menacing Bobby Newport voice. And I thought that was what our podcast almost turned into there.
It really did. Yeah, it really did. So, but again, so they keep this throughout. Issue 6 and 10, and actually they carried over into issue 11, the first issue of the final arc there, but they abandoned it after that, and it's not in the first 5 issues here. But then we go to issue 7, and issue 7 I do want to talk about, because that's the issue from different perspective. That's where we don't follow. We're not actually following Velvet there. We're following 2 different characters, Colt and Roberts, 2 of the spies. But the tagline there was, she was a woman on the run, and soon she would be in his sights. Which, I mean, again,
I think the way I described it earlier is what I'm sticking with. It has the veneer of meaning. Which is what this genre is like all about.
Yeah. The next issue here, behind enemy lines, nothing will stand in her way. I just, there's just these are, it just, again, you can't help but read these, and like you're hearing the movie trailer voice guy. It is,
right. No, this is the kind of meta stuff that I really love. One of my favorite series of mystery novels right now is a series called Hawthorne and Horowitz, where Anthony Horowitz writes in first person as himself with a fictional detective that he's invented. And this detective has has arranged like, you follow me around and write my stories so that I can make some money as a private eye, because it's not that lucrative of a business. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the last book, he gets all of the suspects that they've been looking into for the whole book together in this one auditorium, and like walks through the procedure. And Horowitz at the end of that was, Anthony Horowitz was like, he's like, what was that about, Hawthorne? We're like, what? You knew who it was. Why did you do that? He was like, well, I wanted you to write a book about it, and so I gave you a big Agatha Christie moment. And it was like, that was such a great way to write the Agatha Christie moment in, like, where it's like, yes, I'm like conforming to the tropes of the genre, but I'm aware of it, and I'm even going to let you in on why I did it, because in this world, this guy knows, like, these stories actually don't make good novels unless we add this
unless we have
genre,
unless we have the big parlor room reveal. Sure. Yeah. So I mean, so the last 2 here, issue 9, the hunt for answers takes a deadly turn, and then issue 10 here, just maybe my favorite one. I don't know. She's out for blood or a knife in the back. And so if you think about these here, they're and so that one, issue 10, we'll get to it in terms of how the story plays out. That's where kind of the deception takes place, right? That's where the character Damian Lake, the one that Velvet breaks out of prison or out of custody or whatever it is, the longer game is revealed, right? That there's this betrayal in the story that you kind of expect from the genre. So in a way, they are tying in some of what happens in the issue in these taglines, but again, they just find like kind of the most absurd and ridiculous way to.
I think what it is, I think they're always
relay that.
Are you familiar with the niche grammatarian's term zeugma?
Nope.
Zeugma.
Nope, not. I do not. I'm not.
It is a ridiculous English word that simply describes when a word applies in two different sentences in the same sentence. So examples would be she broke his car and his heart, and
Oh, okay.
or John and his license expired last week. And
Yeah.
I feel like all of these spy names are trying to get the feeling of a Zugma, but sometimes it's just like, well, that's not a Zugma. That was just nothing. Like you know, they're trying to give that like epic feel of like, oh, we did a clever thing with words. When in most cases, if you batted that idea around for another 10 or 15 minutes, you could probably turn it into one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it seems like they did the first thing that like there's a certain like cadence and number of syllables balancing these type of like taglines.
Yeah. No,
And
I think you're right.
I
I think
think
there
they're
is.
like once we hit the vibe,
Yeah.
it's all over. We're
I
done.
think there's a level of maybe not in the spy genre in general, but I think definitely a book like this, which is not commenting on the spy genre, but like they're, actively using the tropes and archetypes of the spy genre, where there's a little bit of like first idea, best idea, like
Right.
whatever the first thing you think of, no matter how cheesy it is, it's probably the best idea because that fits the vibe. And the more you think on it, the more you workshop it, the quote unquote better it will get, but the further away from the ideal that you want, it's
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Like if you sit and think on it and work on it, you'll get the perfect tagline, but it won't be nearly as fun, you know, because that's what they're really aiming for, is that level of fun and absurdity and it's a bit of cheesiness there. So I think it's really great. I think it's really fun that they had those on there. And like I said, it's only for this arc, issue 6 through 10, and then they do it again for issue 11, the start of the next arc. And then the final 4 issues don't have it there. So I don't know why they decided against it to stop doing it. I think it's unfortunate. I think the covers are a little lessened by it. They don't have that extra little punch there. But the art on the covers is still incredible, still gorgeous. It's still it's the kind of book that when you see it on the shelf, if you saw it on the shelf, it would jump out at you because nothing else on the shelf around it is going to look like that, And I think there's something to be said about that as well, of trying to make your book stand out and why you do it differently that way, versus maybe a, I don't know, more standard or keeping the same kind of look on the inside and the outside. Having a cover that stands out and is stunning like Velvet has, I'm sure help lead to sales. And even there are some letters in the back too where people say mostly to the similar idea, this idea of I went to the comic shop and I picked it up because I saw the covers and it jumped out at me, and that was enough for me to keep going. And I think that's
Yeah, and it's enough.
It's something that comics have,
Right. And I think what we talked about in the past with like the Image Brubaker Phillips deal is like once they signed that deal, well, I think what Image is saying is like these two dudes put their name on anything, and there are Brubaker Phillips readers who are just gonna buy it. Like we don't have to market anymore. All we have to
hand up. Yeah, doesn't matter.
Raising his hand in the
doesn't
meeting.
matter. Yeah, if their name's on a solicitation, instant pre-order. Doesn't matter what it is.
Right. And I think they're like before I got into that duo, I would see their stuff on the shelf, but like I was especially criminal stuff. I was like, is this part of an ongoing series? Can I just pick it up and jump in? And the message I was getting from Image is like, yeah, we don't really care. It's not for you. Like you're welcome to get into it and like go home, Google it, whatever, buy it. But we're gonna sell enough without you.
There's a level. Yeah, there's
pairing him with a Steve Epting is a new way to bring people into Brubaker's writing.
I think so. Yeah. Well, and I think very clearly and it's not just again, someone like Steve Epting is a name people know, but it's not about any rando artist, someone they worked with before. It's about, hey, did you read Captain America?
Yeah. Well, and that's a big draw.
Yeah. So I think that a huge draw for them here was like, we'll try to get Brubaker fans who are going to, and because Ed Brubaker himself as a writer has plenty of fans because of his time at both Marvel and DC. But you're selling this book here being like, this is from the guys that did the Winter Soldier, and you like that, right? That was cool, right? Pick up this book here.
I mean, they're not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Winter Soldier, when that hit in what, was that 04, whatever it was huge. And then obviously they made the movie out of it and people loved that. And that brought more people to the Winter Soldier work. And Velvet was coming out we talked about it last week. The movie came out between issues 4 and 5 of Velvet. Like that's when it was released. And so, yeah, you're banking on that fact, but at the same time, but then there are people who, maybe just, so I was as we're recording this here, I just got back from Orlando. I was at MegaCon for the show down there. And one thing that always strikes me when I go down to these shows is that there are comic readers who identify as DC readers or Marvel readers. And that's all they read.
I used to be. Yeah, I know. I used to say I was a DC reader.
Yeah. And I have never understood that. And I was in line. I was in line for Scott Snyder, who obviously has an incredible history at DC, but also a ton of independent stuff too, right? A ton of creator-owned stuff. But there were people in line talking about, DC and only having DC stuff. And then they were talking about Ghost Machine, which is the new kind of image. It's a new kind of company that's their stuff is being printed in Image. It's a bunch of creators: Jeff Johns, Jason Fabok, Peter Tomasi, Ivan Rice, Francis Montopole. They're all these together. A lot of people who worked at DC now at Image doing their own thing. And this guy was talking about it. It was like, yeah, man, I'm a DC reader, but like, all these guys, they worked at DC, so I'll read this Ghost Machine thing. And I just had this thought of like, so you've like never read anything outside of DC? And I was like, I don't understand. I don't understand that. This idea of like, if it has DC on the corner, that's all you're reading. And it doesn't matter who the creators are.
Right. That's what kills me when it's like, it doesn't matter. I loved, if let's say right now you were just totally fixated on Chip Zdarsky's Batman, and it's killing you that it's only coming out one issue a month. Although this is a bad example since at the moment it's coming out more frequently. But let's say you were just like, Chip Zdarsky, dude, totally gets me everything I want in a character. And you were like, well, he has kind of an epic, probably 50 issues on Daredevil. Yeah. And if you just read Chip Zdarsky at Marvel, and they're like, no, I can't do it. Yeah. Daredevil's so different from Batman. Marvel's so different from DC. Even though I love this writer, can't do it. That makes no sense to me.
Yeah. The number of people that were in this Scott Snyder line that only had Batman stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have Batman stuff signed by him. But if you just have New 52 Batman or Dark Knight's Metal or Death Metal, anything like that, but like I'm sitting there and I've got issues of American Vampire that he did with Raphael Albuquerque. I've got Witches he did with Jock. I've got all this other stuff there. And it's not about, I'm not saying look how much better I am than other people, but it's like, what I am saying is like, I love Scott Snyder as a writer. So I want to support him in all of his things, and it is baffling to me that people can be a fan of a writer or a creator, but only read the stuff from like a small, narrow portion of what they do. Like, why not expand out? And then why is the idea of expanding out so like brain melting for them? Like I have a really hard time with that, of understanding like, okay, well, if you're a Jeff Johns fan and you read all of his Green Lantern stuff and you loved it, why is it so hard for you to be like, well, I'm not going to try this other thing he wrote, this Geiger? I don't get why that leap is so hard, but there are comic fans where that leap is super difficult, And so, yeah, there are. Brubaker is the kind of writer that has fans like that, that maybe you loved his Cap run, or maybe you loved his Batman run, or something like that, and then maybe you didn't jump into any of his creator-owned stuff. Maybe you've never read anything he's done with Sean Phillips, and maybe you loved what he did on Cap with Steve Epting, but you just don't read anything outside of Marvel, so maybe you wouldn't have picked up Velvet, So there's got to be a way for Image and all them to try and sell you these books, which you would think would be the audience for them, right? You would think someone who loved, who would say that, I loved the that run on Captain America. Well, then why don't you read this other book here from Image? They're like, nope, can't read that. Don't only read Marvel. And
it's wild stuff.
It is wild.
Since we're talking about him as a writer, I like my first note on the actual book, not the covers and things like that, but this is, I think, you can shoot this down if this is not correct, but this is a trend that I believe I've begun to notice with Ed Brubaker's writing, which is he gets us very locked in the first trade to our character, and then in the second volume he will do a perspective switch and follow a character we've not followed before. And I'm thinking specifically Kill or Be Killed. Volume 1, we're with our dude the whole time, and then volume 2 we move to the police department. We find the person investigating him, and it happens again here. I believe it happens in the Fade Out. It's not exactly the same because it's not the hunting and the hunter.
The Fade Out's a little different because, but there is the sense of, as the story goes on, he will like to do that. Now, Criminal being an anthology story, each trade is different. But no, I think there is a trend there. I think he likes to do that. He wants to get you set up, and in both the cases of the Brubaker written books that we've talked about, because they both happen to be about what is essentially kind of a manhunt mystery. In that second arc, you get the person who is, you move from the hunted person to the hunter. You're right. In Kill or Be Killed, we got the police department and the detective that was following the case here. And here we get the two other agents at Arc 7 who have been tasked with trying to bring Velvet in. And that happens in issue 7. We get Colt and we get Roberts, two other spies there. I would imagine for someone like Brubaker, it's just a fun exercise.
I actually have more of an opinion on that, of why he likes doing it, especially in this book.
Okay, go ahead.
Because in my opinion, when I look at like a book like Harry Potter, and people criticize that book, they're like, well, Hermione's actually the best character. Like, it should have been a book about Hermione. I'm like, right, but it's actually super boring to write a book about the best character, about the smartest character. It's so much better to have a vantage point on the smart character, which is why there's not a book that follows Dumbledore. He gets to come in and drop pearls of wisdom and be brilliant in every scene he's in. And Hermione gets to come in and solve the problems while we're stuck following Harry, who's kind of an idiot. Yeah. And in this case, when it's like a John Wick style, Taken Liam Neeson style character, where it's like this character knows how to do everything and whatever, it's so insulting to the reader, and so patronizing to have the narration explain everything and the character explains to you why they're so brilliant as they go. So instead, what Brubaker does is he switches to someone who's trying to keep up with this person. And you see them saying like, why did she do this? Oh, it must be because she thought of this, this, and this. And it's like, do you see how much better that is than Velvet narrating every
That's a good point.
Stupid thought she has to say, like, I'm going to do this so that they think this, and then they do this, and then that's like, that's not a story. That's just nothing.
That's a great observation. It's a form of show don't tell. You're still telling.
Exactly. Yes.
You're still telling, but you are showing. You're showing what your character can
does
do.
It shows Velvet's impact on other people.
Versus I like that. I like that a lot. I think it totally works though, because I was in my notes here about that issue. I was going to ask how you felt about that, switching the perspectives, and one of my notes was the reason I liked it was because you saw how clever Velvet is, but also you see that the people chasing her aren't idiots either. Like, they're not
right. This is not a government bureaucracy stumbling over themselves.
You got both sides. You got the character like Colt, who is doing the things that he knows he's supposed to do in tracking her, but he's also questioning it because he's like, I got to follow this lead up.
Yes.
But
what you're rooting for is that Colt will figure out like, oh, yes, she's not gone rogue.
Yes.
She's not corrupt.
Yeah.
So I need to figure out what she figured out to get where she is. Yeah. Now I'm going to be helping her by the time I meet her.
Yeah.
That's what you're rooting for.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I got to follow the lead up because that's my job, but also like I'm figuring this thing out. And then you also have someone like Roberts who, we're given two guys here, Colt and Roberts, both of the agency, both hunting her in different ways. Roberts is a little more straightforward. I don't know what is his role, like he's internal security or something like that. I don't know if it's an actual field agent spy. Colt is an actual spy. He has a designation, right? Like I wrote it down here, X-33. He has an actual field designation. Roberts seems like more like a IA kind of thing, internal security. But he's much more straightforward here. But and so we see them at the end eventually have this kind of meeting of the minds, right? Of like, wait, why is she doing all these things? Why would she come back to London? Why would she do that? All of this, and they reach a level kind of an understanding of what you said, that of like, are these the actions of a traitor? Like, would she be doing all this if she were actually a traitor? That actually doesn't make any sense. And so, yeah, you're right. We're following both these guys, following the breadcrumbs and the trails that Velvet has left. Where, yeah, we can see both how clever she is and also how, I don't know what clever those guys are, but at least non-idiots, that it's not a bunch of doofuses following after her, that she's so much better than all these other guys who are just a bunch of idiots. They're pretty damn good too. They're pretty smart as well. And they're able to figure out the things that she's figuring out as well, if they're given kind of the same kind of leads. And I liked how that issue made that clear. And I think you're right.
Yeah.
The thing I didn't think about was that change in perspective of how much it increases our main character by seeing her through the eyes of a secondary character, by seeing her actions that way and have someone else explain what she's doing, that we see how much more brilliant our character is, versus, you're right, having her just walk through her own things, her own thought process, and being like, look how smart I am, look how good I am at this, and instead, when we cut back to that kind of narration from Velvet, we see it at the end of the first arc where she, in her mind, screws up with the wife of the ambassador, right?
Yes.
Where we see her actually make some mistakes. She was good enough to break into the prison and break her out of that, to do all of that stuff there. She's skilled enough to do that. But she still makes a mistake. Doesn't read the situation properly about this fake son and all that, and what this wife wants. And we see it again here at the end of this arc. She's good enough to infiltrate Arc 7, arrange for the transfer of this high value prisoner, this Damian Lake character. She's good enough to do all of these steps to get him out of custody, to get her where she wants him to be, only for have him turn the tables on her, ditch her, and then find out she was just a part of his plan, So she's still good enough to do all of this, but still, when we get back into her head, she still sees the ways that she's not good enough, the way that she is screwed up, the way that her own mission has blinded her to the larger game, the way that it's referred to at the end of issue 10, that she thinks she's been in charge this whole time. But really, maybe she's just been a pawn in someone else's game still, even now. So there's a way to, you get that counterbalance. When you see her through the eyes of someone else, we get, all right, she's really, really good at this. But when we cut back to her own perspective, we can see her making mistakes, and she's critical of herself, of the mistakes she's making.
Yeah, I mean, and some of this, I felt like she's being unfair to herself. Which definitely. I think is how you're supposed to feel. It's like, man, what a world she lives in, what a standard she holds herself to.
Because again, we see she's good enough to do all these other things. She can infiltrate, the whether it's a high level prison or her own spy agency. She can do all these things. But yeah, okay, so she maybe reads some people a little wrong, because she's 15 some odd 20 years out of the game. And yeah, she sees it as like a fatal flaw, when you're also kind of like, dude, like you can do you're still really good at this. Like the level of espionage she can do is still way above everybody else. But yeah, you're right. She's a little hard on herself. But I think you're supposed to read it that way. You're supposed to understand that she feels she's supposed to be perfect. Maybe because before things went awry with her husband, maybe she was perfect, you know?
Well, that, and I was wondering if it was also like the uh, like she has the double burden of having to be twice as good because she's a woman in a man's job.
Yes, I'm sure that was it too.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just, and like, I don't need a whole issue talking about that, but just like being able to pick that up from like, that's the 70s and she was doing this in the 50s and she was the best one. And it seems like most people don't really recognize that she was the best at it. Until they're trying to hunt her down.
Well, and that was so much of the first arc, right? This idea of everyone underestimating her, and even so much in that issue 7, this idea of Colt and all of them thinking that, you know, oh, she's just Director Manning's secretary, you know, and then finding out, oh wait, no, she wasn't. Not only was she not just a secretary, she was a wildly decorated agent, you know, and but that first impression, that initial part of the search is you assume she's not very good. You assume she doesn't know what she's doing. But then, you find out not only is she competent, she might be better than you. And that realization, you're right, is something that I think she's playing on. The story is playing on, and is aware of because, we're reading this now present day for a story set in the 70s with ties to the 50s and knowing what the social hierarchy was back in the day and how that plays into stories like this. They're both commenting on it metatextually for the reader, and also showing it in action in the story.
Yeah. By the way, this is a very poorly constructed note that I wrote, but do you have any experience of like yada yadaing over some of the dialogue? Like when they're getting really into the like weeds of like, back in the day, this character said this and this did this. I'm like, I feel like some of that just kind of washes over me. In the same way it would if I was reading or if I was watching a movie where it was like, I'll pick it up when it's something important, but some of this seems like necessary filler.
You mean definitely on a reread? I get that, because I think there are moments where I think you're right. There are moments when the dialogue is less about what they're saying and just that they're talking at all, you know?
Right.
And you know, I think let's go back to the last arc, when after the casino, right after Velvet goes in the casino and saves the former KGB spy, right? And then they're walking on the beach and they're just talking, and they're basically talking about the past, talking about, you know, former missions and the first time they met each other when they were on opposite sides of the war, things like that. And there's a lot there that I think is unimportant up until the end of that conversation when she asks about her husband, you know, Mockingbird. And he's like, no, he wasn't a spy. You know, he was never a traitor. But everything up to that, all the reminiscing about this, like none of that I think is actually important, the specifics there. It's just that you're showing that these people have a history. They had a history where they were on opposite sides of the war. And now here they are post-war, kind of on their own and these kind of, you know, frenemies kind of thing where we can work together because we have aligned interests now. And it's just about establishing the relationship. But you can skip over the specifics of like what that mission was when she stole intel from him.
And I feel like
none of that's important.
Because I'm either going to dive so deep that I need more information.
Yeah.
Or I'm just going to get what I need to advance the story.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you get some of that here with the Damian Lake character, where the exact specifics aren't important. But you need to get the vibe of what happened at his office, you know, what happened with everyone at the Paris station there when he was in charge. But again, the specifics, some of the specifics I think of like who read what file, you know, none of that ends up being actually important. All you ends up being important really is that whatever Damian Lake tells you ends up being a lie, you know? Like that's what's important there.
Yeah.
So there's some exposition there, some storytelling stuff that, I think you can gloss over a little bit there. And I think definitely on a reread, as I've been going through this again, I can skip over some of that stuff there. So if you were to ask me the specifics of what was Damian Lake's story, like what did he say? His whole thing was someone came in, they infiltrated his office, and they killed everybody except him, and he was left in like a catatonic state. That was his story.
Right.
The specifics behind that, what I couldn't tell you what it was. All I know is in the end, ultimately he was lying, that he was the one in charge who did all that, and he killed his whole office, and this whole thing has been a ruse. So the specifics, not so important.
Yeah, totally. One other thing, and this is backing up a step, but I did notice and appreciate, and you're reading single issue, right?
Yes, I'm rereading single issue. Yep.
Okay, so in trades, they do have each volume broken down, with their title card as part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4.
Okay.
So this is not part 6, part 7, part 8, part 9, part 10.
Okay.
This is parts 1 through 5.
Well, and I will say
a second story.
Yeah, and so in the single issues are done that way as well. Like there is a title page that says Secret Lives of Dead Men, part whatever. So that is in the single issues as well. They make that very clear that this is a separate story, not even though it is part of the ongoing too. So I'm glad they kept that there. In the individual trades that you're reading, this is a new storyline, and we're breaking this down as well in individual parts, as opposed to part 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's actually part 1 through 3, 1 through 5. So I like that. I'm glad they kept that. That's it's a subtle shift, right? It's a subtle shift in mindset in terms of what you're reading, right?
It is, because I was picturing this, like if this were a movie, like you can see how this would be the second in the trilogy.
Yeah.
She starts on the run. It seems like she's got the upper hand because, and I think I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I felt like it was surprising that she was already heading back to London.
Yes, you did. Yes.
Yeah. And
the book comments on that.
The book begins with that. It's right. Yes. Right. Like, yeah. It's like,
I'm too smart. I'm too smart to go back to London. They know that, which is why she walks right through Heathrow. You're right. Yeah. And so it is that idea of the action keeps going, but you're right. You end that first arc with the revelation about her husband, the first movie, and
right.
Cut to black. So you come back now in this one, she's on a revenge tour. And again, you think she's in control this whole time. And then you get to the end of this volume, this second movie, and no, she's still being played. She's still just a pawn in this larger game, this larger conspiracy. There's something else going on. And then boom, cut to black, set up for the third movie. You're right. There is a cinematic aspect to the story arcs. You can see how the overall arcs for each of these trade volumes, you can see how they're set up in that way.
Her paragliding into the building, as the end of the second act, where it feels like, oh, this could be the climax of the movie, but actually this was just to get the next piece of information.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we break the guy out.
Yeah. That whole sequence
and then
of her
the train sequence. And then I think a perfect ending to a second movie is where our hero gets blacked out, wakes up, discovers everyone else with a bullet in their head, realizes she's been played, but spared and left alive, and roll credits. It's like, holy crap. And then you get a little post-credits.
I'll say, roll credits, and then we get a stinger, which they actually, the fact they put it in there with a full black page that says this epilogue. And then you keep going, and you get this little stinger, and you see that there's something larger going on. Which again, and I think what's interesting about that is, much like you get these stingers in movies, that is now information that we, the reader, have that our character doesn't. The amount of times that happens is very few. Obviously, we get the change in perspective in that issue 7. We follow Colton Roberts, but it's a change of perspective, but we haven't learned anything different about Velvet because they're chasing her. So we're actually learning about her. Like you said, we're seeing the trail that she left. So they're not learning anything that we don't already know from Velvet herself or about Velvet and what's going on. We know she's setting this trail up. we know she's trying to hunt down what really happened to prove her own innocence. And it's about these other two guys catching up to get the information. Here we're given a scene outside of Velvet's perspective, where now we have more information than she does. You know, we know something about the overall story and some larger conspiracy that's going on, that at the time we're reading this, that our character doesn't know. So now puts us, the reader, ahead of the character, which is an interesting place to be in these kind of spy stories, in a story that's about secrets and reveals and whose side is you on and things like that. To put us ahead of our main character is an interesting position to be in going into the final act, the final arc, the final issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. And it's also another payoff for the character, like the perspective switch.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, okay, well, it wasn't just so we could admire how smart she is.
Yeah.
We actually get a little bit ahead of her.
Yeah.
And so now we've got some benefit as a reader where it's like, well, we're not strictly Velvet's our main character, but we're not limited perspective. I mean, we're still limited perspective, but we're not as limited as we were.
Yeah. You know, it pays off issue 7 too, because you know that's Roberts there talking to director Manning. So we see him after all this investigation when he was like gung ho, like shoot on sight. The more he's dug into this, which is, I think, on one hand, what someone like Velvet would want, right? She would want someone internally to dig in to see why this is happening, and he does that. He digs in and he finds more information, and he's putting some of these dots together the way that Velvet has. So we see that again. These guys following them are also, they're not idiots. They're competent as well. We see what he's trying to figure out. And then, of course, the moment he's able to try to say something, he gets cut down. You know, they all get cut down there. But right when he's trying to reveal something, and he states, you know, early in issue 6, you know, Velvet kind of goes through her, not hit list, but like her potential suspect list, you know, like who are the people at the top who could have set me up, you know, and she runs through all these various names. And that's what she starts going after. And we see at the end in the epilogue, those are the names that Roberts lists right before he gets gunned down by Damian Lake there, you know, which again sets off just, okay, Velvet's right? These people, maybe it's not all of them, maybe it's just one of them, but the people that she thought could be behind this are all connected in this certain way. And a lot of them have all died now. You know, they've all been killed. So is someone trying to cover this up? How was she involved with it? So we see that she was on the right track, and there's something greater, larger going into, larger conspiracy that she's heading into now. So going into the final act, the final issues.
Yeah. Let's see. I only have one more note left.
Okay.
Which is that this is stupid, but at the beginning of I'll call it chapter 5 because I'm reading the trades.
Sure.
She gets trapped on the train, you know, after he's escaped out the bathroom window. And it's the very first page, starts with the train, shows her holding a cigarette, zooms in on her face. She says, "Yes, I understand," acknowledging that she, you know, understands French.
Yeah.
And it seems like she is not speaking back to them in French. Maybe she is. I can't tell if that's italicized or not.
Let me pull it up. Keep talking. Let me pull it up.
But either way, she has the very precise cigarette flip, which is shades of Fractions Hawkeye with, like, you know, the quarters and everything else.
Yeah. Directly right in the eye.
Yeah. To cultivate that kind of flicking ability with a lit cigarette and be able to have the lit end hit the guy right in the face.
Yeah.
Just the way you want it to. Is just great spy stuff, which is also a shout out to, you know, if you haven't read the Fraction Hawkeye run, like pause before you go to volume 3 of Velvet, read all of that and then come back, because it's just incredible stuff.
Yeah. Also too, I love you know, the way that they did that Brubaker and Epting in the first book. You know, we're globetrotting, right? We're going different places, especially like Eastern Europe, post-war Eastern Europe. We're going to these exotic places because that's what spy stories do. So naturally, you have to end up on a train, right? Train sequence is so important, and maybe it's just because it's the era, you know, the time we're in. But you know,
I love. I mean, like
many great scenes.
I'm so sad that like the plot doesn't really, the device doesn't really work anymore. I know like the newest Mission Impossible had a big train scene or whatever, but I'm like,
but yeah,
it's not the same as North by Northwest or
yeah,
From Russia with Love
yeah,
or, any of these other things where it was like, yeah, trains are how you get places.
yeah.
And, you know,
No,
it's just this slow moving, you're on the move, you're on the run, so to speak, but you're also, what do they call that in
well,
TV? It's a bottle episode type thing.
yeah. I was saying,
Like they're cheap to make, actually.
You're confined. You're
Right.
confined. Yeah, no, the trains are just they're such great settings for stories. And I think especially the spy story is always great. I'm not going to say every train movie is great, but a lot of them are really, because you have this idea of there's motion forward, but you're stuck. You can't do anything about it. You can't get off the train. I mean, I guess you can. You can make the jump or whatnot, but there's that element of danger, because you're always at some point in the train story, you're going to end up on outside the train, on the top of the train while it's moving. Like that's going to happen no matter what, and it's always great. It's one of those. It's that kind of scene that like I'm always in for. Whether it's Mission Impossible, whether it's James Bond, whether it's
the first Captain America movie.
Yeah, or
I mean,
Indiana Jones multiple times.
Right.
If you're
Skyfall.
Yeah.
Before the credits, he gets shot off the top of a train.
Something about a train. It always seems to work. It always delivers. It's so great to see. So yeah, I think that's one of those fun spy genre tropes that they've incorporated again here, and used to their advantage. And I think the scene where she actually has to make the jump, because at some point you got to jump on the train, right? You're on the top of the train. You're on top of the train. You're running from the bad guys, as it were. You're always near water. Doesn't matter, right? At some point, you're always near water. There's always a bridge coming up, so you can always make that jump. And I do love that scene, which is kind of like it's kind of like a full page splash of her jumping, and then some smaller panels for kind of overlaying, which are kind of the close-ups of her in the air, pulling herself out of the water, things like that. I think it's a great kind of action set piece sequence right there.
Yeah. So that is actually the end of my notes, which I hate to end on such a anticlimactic thing, but the cigarette flip just made me think of it, which I loved. They stole that for the Hawkeye show too. Hawkeye was like changing the channel on the TV by flicking a quarter.
Flicking a quarter. Yeah. Which is, I mean, I'm not saying I can hit I can hit a button on the television, but like, you can take.
He claimed he could kill a man.
Well, he's Hawkeye. He's Hawkeye. He could. No, he said knock a guy out. Knock a guy out with a quarter or a nickel. Dime's too light.
Right. Yeah. And she said, "What about a dime?" And he's like, "No,
dime's too light." But yeah, no, it's he's a Hawkeye. They can. These are people with superpowers. Sorry, they're superpowered people without actual superpowers, right? So you assume someone who is trained the way that Velvet Templeton has been trained, just like the way James Bond is trained, or John Wick, Ethan Hunt, all these characters. None of them have actual superpowers, but they kind of do. Their superpower is just being a little bit better at everything than everybody else, a little bit better agility, a little bit better stamina, a little bit better recovery, a little bit better aim, all those little things. Just, the dials for them are all just a couple notches higher, and that's their superpower. So when you add it all together, it seems a little ridiculous, but that's just what it is. Also, I think in general, though, lit cigarette to the face, whether it hit you right in the eye or not, it's probably going to be enough of a deterrent anyway, right?
It depends how much ash was hanging on it, because if there's hot ash coming at your face, it doesn't really matter if it makes a point of connection, or it's just enough to make you
enough to
you're going to cover your face
enough to react, and that's going to give someone like Velvet enough time to do what she does, which is then just kind of.
That's the other thing. Is that each time there was hand-to-hand combat, whether it was in the office building or on that train, I was counting in my head how long I thought the fight was going, whether it was more than 5 or 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And it seems like they've stuck pretty close to that.
Yeah.
Like her moves are not like parrying and countering. It's like, wait, strike out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that train sequence is great, right? So she flicks the cigarette at the one guy to get him to react. And what she do? Just a couple of moves to knock some guys out, and then she's out the window. She's not sticking around to, I mean, they're cops. I mean, she doesn't want to sit there and beat a bunch of cops, but she's not sticking around to fight all these guys. It's just, I need enough time to get away so I can get on the roof of the train. It's about getting away. So yeah, it's about these short bursts, what she talked about before.
Well, she doesn't have the stamina to go for 3-4 minute fights every time.
She's not trying to do that because that doesn't help her objective. Even when she's inside of Arc 7, when she breaks back in, she is attempting on some level to be stealth. She's trying to get in for a certain specific task. And it just because Roberts figured out her plan, she's not expecting to have agents, show resistance against her. But yeah, it's what they talk about, what they present about the characters, what they've held true is that she's not trying to get in these giant brawls, these like John Wick style, like him falling down the stairs 45 times,
right.
They're not,
by the way, they've left the possibility, her gentleness with the dog has left the possibility open for the big Wick Velvet crossover.
Oh, well, yeah.
Fudge the timeline a little bit.
Yeah, you gotta, that's not, I mean, the Keanu Reeves is older than you think there, but yeah. They're not trying to have her be in these fights where she is at the point of exhaustion, because that's part of the charm, I guess, of the whatever, or the draw of the John Wick movies, right? Is that he's super hyper competent, but you're watching him do this over a fight scene that lasts 20 minutes.
Right.
And you can see him slow down and have to compensate for the fact that he's been in a fight for 20 minutes. Velvet's not trying to do that. And we got her mission statement about fighting, early on. And we see her hold of that because we understand what her goal is. Her goal isn't to beat everybody up. Her goal is to get away. Her goal is to survive. So she's trying to get out of this. And so, yeah, these action sequences are very quick, but they're all very effective. She's very efficient in the way she fites. And it's
deeply relatable because, what she's saying is, basically my whole goal, right? My whole goal is to sit down again. And my whole life now is moving from like one place where I can sit to another place where I can sit. And I think the longest I'm now willing to go without sitting is like a Comic Con or Comic Expo. And that's the excitement there will drive me, but I'll be sore. But even now, like a sporting event, I'm like, okay, guys, let's calm down. It's the second quarter. Everyone have a seat. Let's save the standing and really yelling till the fourth quarter. And then people were like, I think you should watch on TV. I'm like, I think so too. I have a really nice couch. I'm not,
now that you're
not
saying
cut out
that,
for this.
Yeah. I'm not someone who stands. But I can get away with it because I'm really tall. I feel like I stand, I block people. So I can be like, listen, I'm good. But you're right. Yeah. If I went to a show, I was just thinking as you were talking about that, like the first day I was in Orlando, I left my hotel at 7:30. I was about a mile walk to the convention center. And so I got in line. So I left 7:30, walked there, got there, stood in line to pick up my badge. And then I didn't sit down until 5:15. And it's a very specific number, I know, but that was when the Tom King, Mitch Gerrard's panel started.
Ooh,
So yeah, I went all day, all my feet, walking around, didn't sit down, didn't stop.
You don't get a chair for the panel?
Oh no. So that's how I knew. That's how I knew when I sat down.
Oh, right. Okay,
right. Up until the point, all day, on my feet, walking around the convention center, up until I sat down for that panel for 45 minutes. And at 45 minutes, then I got up and walked back to my hotel room, walked a mile back, and then collapsed on the bed and realized, literally my entire body hurt.
That tracks. Yeah.
Because at some point it gets for me where it's like I have to keep standing. I can't. If I sit down, I'm not getting back up. Like that was a fear when I got down to that panel, was like, if I sit down and let my body relax, like I might be able to stand up again. But yeah, I get back to my hotel room that night and my body just shuts down because I'm very tired. And that's just standing around carrying around comic books. I'm not jumping from building to building in a stealth suit like Velvet is.
Right.
Seeing her or kind of flying squirrel her way through the building into the windows and all that. I'm not getting shot at. Which she said she finds out the stealth suit is bulletproof. Congrats on that. But I'm sure it doesn't feel well. That's very John Wick then as well, right? Always says, stop, no penetration, but you still get a massive bruise because it's like getting hit with a hammer or something like that. So congrats on not getting shot, but you probably broke some ribs on the way out though. So not doing anything as crazy physical as that, but yeah, it's understandable. She wants to get out,
I mean, to be fair, yeah, you are, and I've been with you to multiple cons now. You're hauling a lot of stuff with you.
I'm bringing
right?
a lot of stuff. Yeah. Bringing a lot of stuff.
No dog bites, but still.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff you're lugging around carrying. And not just that you're carrying stuff, but you're being so ginger with it. Like, you're trying to protect things from getting trampled and stomped on and kicked. And even as you're, very tired and hauling things around, you're then very delicately pulling things out of bags and boards. And you use those paint pens, so you have to stand around for 5 minutes after every signature, gently waving, blowing, or do you just let it sit?
I'll find an empty table, kind of take it over, put the issues down, take a extra backing board or something like that, fan it, let it let it dry. There's a weird contradiction of me being at a show like that, but that's what I do. And it's kind of my, I don't know. I'm a weirdo like that. I know, other people do go to shows. I met a friend down, an old college friend at MegaCon. She was down there. And she goes to shows all the time, but she does the celebrity picture thing. Like that's her thing, the cast, The Princess Bride was down there. One of many kind of cast reunited. That was her thing. She wanted to go see Carrie Elwes and Robin Wright Penn and all them, and so that's what she does. She is there for that. I am not. I am there solely for comics. She couldn't care less about that, and yet we can still go to a show like that and get our enjoyment out of it. So yeah, I'm wired to be the person who can stand in line for 2.5 hours to get Jeff Loeb's signature on some stuff. Because that's totally a thing that happened. His line was very, very long. Scott Snyder's line was very, very long. I'm good with that. I'm just going to stand in line with my stuff. And then I'll pay for it later. Cause I get to the end of the day and literally everything hurts. But
yeah. Well, next time I may take headphones if I know I'm going to be in a long line and just knock out an audiobook or a podcast.
I do that often as well. I have earbuds in sometimes, listen to music, but you oftentimes, if you're in a line long enough, you end up making small talk people around you because they want to see, hey, what books you getting signed by them? What do you have?
Well, it's like, that's the great thing about those events is you have a built-in point of interest. It's like, it's not like making small talk in a coffee shop with someone standing with you in line where you're like, I have no idea what they're into other than they probably drink coffee.
Yeah.
This one, it's like, we're in the Tom King line.
Yes.
We both like Tom King.
Yeah.
We both love superheroes staring out windows crying.
Yeah. What do you have with them? What are you getting signed? What books you're reading? Yeah, there's an easy in right there. So, but yeah, no, I'm not sure how we got on this topic. Right, being old and tired and not wanting to do physical exertion.
Wow. Yeah, you brought it back. I could not have retraced it, which is another sign of being old and tired.
Yeah. Well, it's as old as we may be, and although we are, at least I am, about the same age as Velvet is supposed to be. She's supposed to be in her mid 40s now at this point, early mid 40s. I mean, she could wax me. I mean, there's no question. I'd be goon number 3, like in the hallway, that like maybe I get one shot in because she's engaged with goons 1 and 2 already,
to be clear. Yeah. And like when she does the whole gambit with the bomb in the parking garage.
Yeah.
I think if I worked in that office, I would be like, it's very clear she is trying to draw us down there. I'm going to volunteer to go down there because I want to be out of the way of whatever she's trying to do. Like she's trying to get us out of the way. I'd be like, oh yeah, garage, no bomb. Yeah, that's fine. I'll go do that.
You're playing.
I'm playing the self-preservation game.
I'm going to go there because I know she's not there. And I know that, there we go. That's 4D chess right there. Yeah, yeah. Well, in a way, I guess Roberts sees it that way, but of course his goal is to stop her. So he gets down there, realizes what's going on, goes back up into the office itself. So, but yeah, that's a good point. You gotta just looking out for number one, right?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, especially. I mean, she's looking out for number one, and I'm not inclined to get in her way. When she's lethal.
And there is also, again, this level of, and I think this is what some people who were chasing Velvet start to realize, and we start seeing it slowly in the story, is that like, okay, stop underestimating her. Once we've stopped doing that, why is she doing the things she's doing? And that if she can do this already, if she wanted to do anything worse, she could have done that, right? Like if she wants to blow up the building, she could just blow up the building, like why threaten to blow up the building? She's already shown she can get into the building, as the one girl mentions. Oh, that picture's down in the secretary's level of the lot. So she's already inside the building. She's already infiltrated that. She's already done these things. If she wanted to do mass harm, like why send a threatening picture? It's like that you have to.
Well, that and I was thinking
you have to recognize her level of ability already.
Picture in that day.
Well, yeah, well,
like, it's very different than now, where it's like, oh yeah, just take a picture with my phone, send it to Walgreens, pick it up in 90 minutes, and or print it on the spot in Walgreens.
Yeah,
this was like a whole ordeal. I'm like, I liked picturing her in like she's got her own like red
dark room,
dark room.
She got a dark room,
developing. It's like this is
just for one photo,
this is maybe the one part of the plot where they got a little anachronistic, because the timeline of this being like he's still tied to the bomb, waiting while she has left to go develop the picture, put it in an envelope, and give it to the courier, and waiting on a rooftop for all of this to happen while he's tied with a ticking time bomb to him. That was the one thing where I was like, I think they forgot how long it took to get photos back, because even when I was a kid, we would drop them at a place. You take like your Kodak
I think it's
and you would pick it up a week later.
Yeah, well, I think it's a little quicker if you're doing it on your own. She has the means to do that right then and there. I'm sure it goes a little bit quicker. I don't know exactly how quick it is, but
I think I took it as just like the the suit, the glide suit that she has. It's just like, oh sure, yeah, she's got a mechanism for that.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't strain myself trying to figure it out.
She has the skills. Yeah, it's less important, but it's the idea of like, if she wanted to do serious harm, if she actually wanted to bring the building down, like why send the threat? Like you have to be able to see through that, and they eventually do, but it's also like at some point, you have to realize that how they can still be underestimating her at this point. Is questionable. But I think by the time we get to the end of this volume, we see that from an in-universe standpoint, that the people around her are now more aware of what she's capable of. Because I think still, even at that point, there was still a sense of like she's a loose cannon, right? She's a traitor, a loose cannon. But we're seeing now that they all recognize she's more competent than that. She's more focused than that, more principled, and just more competent than that. But yeah, you get a bomb threat at your building from someone who used to work there, and they're already inside the building. Yeah, maybe think for a second, like,
this
is all there's something more going on here. That this may be a ruse. This may not just be straightforward bomb threat. Don't send all of your troops, all of your forces down to this spot there. Maybe think you're getting played, because it's probably what's happening.
Yeah. So anyway, that is all my thoughts on the secret lives of dead men.
Yeah, no. I last little bit, want to call out before we wrap this volume up here. Chris Eliopoulos, the letterer. Again, we have a situation, especially in issue 7, where we're just seeing subtle differences in what the narration is and how we're seeing it. I talked about how Velvet has her own font. I can't really describe it, but she has her own font, and it's got her narration boxes are sharp square edges, and it's got like a yellowish background to it. subtle things that they change differently. When we see Colt, when he's talking, he's got rounded square edges, right? And it's got like a bluish background. When Roberts is talking, he has the sharp square edges as well, but it's got that light greenish background to it. And everybody's got a slightly different font. And then obviously there's the different font, the italicized font for words in a different language, you know. So, but each of these characters, when they get their own narration, their own inner monologue, you know, just the slight difference, that it's one of those things that when you're just reading it, you probably don't notice it explicitly, but it's kind of one of those subconscious things that you see, is those small attention to detail that goes into the storytelling, that goes into the craft, that oftentimes gets overlooked. And it's the thing of like, if you don't notice it, it's a good thing, right? You're not supposed to notice it. It's just, you're supposed to take it in and understand it, and you get the result, you get the effect of it. And I think we get that here, but always want to point out when I see something like that, when it's done as subtly and as deftly as that, to understand that when you're reading it, it just you don't understand why you understand how all these are different. You know, you're not picking up on it when you're reading it, but you do, you get the differences, and you know that, oh, this is someone else talking. This is a different person, whether it's explicitly laid out for you or not, because it was set up for you at the beginning in terms of, this is how this person speaks, this is how this person speaks. And so when you see it later, you're automatically clued into it. You know, they did all the work to set it up, so they don't have to keep explaining it to you, and they don't have to hold your hand through it all, because you've picked up on it as a reader, because they've done enough work beforehand to lay it out there. But again, it's not something that you're going to jump out and see normally. It's all subconscious. It's all on the level that you're just supposed to pick it up as you go, and it happens because they do it so well.
Yeah. Yeah, you still blew my mind when we were reading Descender. And I was like, yeah, I'm tracking the different fonts, and I'm tracking the different colors for the boxes. But then when you pointed out like the shapes of the boxes too, I was like, oh my gosh, there's just nothing.
There's a next level to, because I know that they're thinking about it. There's a reason why every box is different there. So you want to take a look at, why are you differentiating between them? Is it more just to differentiate character, or are you trying to say something about the characters? And I think with Descender, it was obviously they're trying to say something about the characters, because the more squarish boxes were for all the robots, the more rounded ones for all the humans. Here, it's just a matter of, we're using different options. I think we're just to show that these characters are different, and to give the reader, us, just an implicit way to know that who's talking, who's speaking, whose head are we in right now, without them having to do the work every single time to say, oh, this is Colt, this is Roberts, oh, now we're back to Velvet. All of this, we just know because they've shown, and we now inherently, the reader inherently just associates this look, this box with this character, you know? And when it's done, that definitely always want to call that out. So Chris Eliopoulos, great job with the letters here, because it's easily the most overlooked part of comics. You know, we're getting better now talking about artists in general, and now getting better to recognize the colorist and how the amount of work that they put into it, into storytelling, and how much their work goes into not just, you know, enhancing the pencil, the line work, but letterers still often are on the back end, and you know, that's the stuff you're actually reading. And so you can
that's true.
Yeah,
you can
get story and character. You can get more than just what the words are. You can get more out of the story, given how the words are actually presented, than just what the words are. And so
we need to get a letterer on the podcast.
You know what? Yeah,
I Steve Wands.
You know what? There might be some people we can talk to. There are some letterers out there. So yeah, but it would be cool, because it's an often overlooked part, easily the most overlooked part of comics, because they're not often thought about as storytellers. You know, they're often considered just presenting what the story is, and oftentimes that is the case. But every once in a while, again, by the fonts they use, by the word balloon shapes, text box shapes, all these different things, you can get more about a character, about a story, from the lettering as well. So yeah, I'd love to try to get one on the podcast. Well, we should work on that. Let's do that.
Yeah. Well, we'll work on that. in the near future, but next week we will be working on Velvet Volume 3.
Yes.
The final volume, the end, question mark, of Velvet's story.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It'd be great if it went forward, but we know it's the end. Although I'm gonna have to go back and see when they knew it was the end, though. Like, at what point did Brubaker, Epting, and Brett Weiser know that this was the end? Because I don't know if they knew it at this point at the end of issue 10. I'll have to double check and probably that'll probably come up in the letters in terms of when they knew this was actually going to be the end, or at least an extended break. But yeah, Volume 3, issues 11 through 15. The Man Who Stole the World. Another evocative title there.
Yeah. Maybe it's one they'll say out loud. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, you think of the Bowie song, right? The Man Who Sold the World.
Yeah.
There's a play on words there. But yeah, The Man Who Stole the World. The last part of the deluxe edition, if you're reading it, the last 5 issues, the last trade. So yeah, pick those up, read them, and back next week. Get ready to jump in.
All right. We'll see you then.
Peace.